At dawn on the 19th of July in the year 1324, a caravan unlike any other approached the gates of Cairo. The city had seen processions before. Pilgrims, merchants, armies, and emissaries crossed the desert constantly, but this was different. The column stretched as far as the eye could see. Estimates placed the number of people at 60,000. That included soldiers, officials, servants, slaves, and scholars. And with them came hundreds of camels, each carrying bags of gold dust and gold bars. The total weight of gold in the caravan was later said to be more than 2 tons. There were also 80 camels carrying sacks of pure gold dust, each sack weighing up to 300 pounds. The precise inventory was never written down, but witnesses reported that the sheer mass of precious metal overwhelmed the bazaars of Cairo. The man leading this procession was Mansa Musa, the ruler of the Mali Empire. He was making the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca required of all able Muslims. But this was not a modest journey. Musa had prepared for over a year. He drew funds from the empire's treasury and levied contributions from every province. The caravan moved slowly because of its size. Each day, the column advanced only a few miles, stopping to set up temporary cities of tents. The supply chain was immense. Water and fodder for the animals, food for the people, and protection from bandits required constant organization. The route followed the old trans-Saharan trade roads through the Sahel, across the Sahara, and up through Egypt. When Musa entered Cairo, the news spread instantly. The governor of Cairo, al-Umari, later recorded accounts of the visit. Musa was invited to meet the Mamluk Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad. The meeting took place at the citadel of Cairo. Musa was offered a seat, but he refused to sit until the Sultan addressed him as an equal. He was a ruler, not a subject. The Sultan eventually agreed. During the audience, Musa explained that he had come to purchase goods, hire guides, and continue his journey. But he also wanted to make a statement. He distributed gold so freely that the price of gold in Egypt collapsed. For years after his visit, gold was devalued by 10 to 25%. Merchants in Cairo and across the Mamluk Sultanate saw the value of their holdings drop. A single man, through the sheer volume of his spending, destabilized one of the world's largest economies. What happened in Cairo set the stage for the legend. European and Middle Eastern chroniclers wrote about Musa for centuries. The Catalan Atlas, produced in 1375, depicts Mansa Musa seated on a throne, holding a gold nugget the size of a fist, with the caption, "This lord is the richest and most noble king in all the land." The map was commissioned by the King of Aragon and became one of the most famous maps of the medieval world. It placed the Mali Empire prominently on the map, directly connected to the gold trade that fueled the economies of Europe and the Middle East. But the map was only a reflection of a much larger reality. To understand how Mansa Musa became the richest man who ever lived, it is necessary to step backward, beyond the pilgrimage, beyond the gold, and examine the empire he inherited. The Mali Empire rose from the collapse of the Ghana Empire. Around the 13th century, the region of West Africa between the Senegal and Niger rivers was controlled by the Sasso Kingdom. A man named Sundiata Keita led a rebellion that defeated the Sasso at the Battle of Kirina around 135. Sundiata became the first ruler of the Mali Empire, known as the Lion Prince. He established a government based on traditional clan structures, military organization, and Islamic law, though the empire was not fully Muslim at that time. Sundiata focused on consolidating territory, controlling trade routes, and building a professional army. He died around 1255, and his successors expanded the empire to its greatest size. By the time Mansa Musa took the throne around 1312, the Mali Empire stretched from the Atlantic coast in the west to the Niger River bend in the east, covering parts of modern-day Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Mauritania, and Côte d'Ivoire. It was one of the largest empires in the world at the time, comparable in size to the Mongol Empire's western territories. The population was diverse, composed of Mande, Fulani, Saninke, Tuareg, and other groups. Religion was a mix of Islam and traditional beliefs. The ruling class was predominantly Muslim, but the rural population largely maintained ancestral practices. The source of Mali's wealth was not complicated. It sat on enormous gold deposits. The gold mines of Bambuk, located between the Senegal and Falim rivers, and the mines of Bure, along the upper Niger, were among the richest in the medieval world. The gold was extracted by free laborers and slaves using simple techniques like panning and digging shallow pits. It was traded south for salt, copper, and luxury goods from North Africa and Europe, but the real value came from controlling the trade routes. Mali taxed every caravan that passed through its territory. A portion of each load of gold, salt, or cloth went to the state. With control over the major trans-Saharan trade arteries, the empire could dictate prices, restrict competition, and accumulate reserves. Mansa Musa was the direct beneficiary of this system, but he also improved it. He expanded the empire's borders, particularly to the north and east, bringing more trade centers under his control. He built new cities, including Timbuktu, which grew from a small seasonal settlement into a major intellectual hub. He established madrasas, libraries, and mosques. He recruited scholars from Egypt, Arabia, and North Africa to teach at the University of Sankore in Timbuktu. He also standardized weights and measures across the empire to facilitate trade. His administration was organized around provinces, each governed by a local chief or a royal appointee. The army was well-trained and equipped with horses, bows, and swords. The empire fielded tens of thousands of soldiers. With this infrastructure, Mali maintained peace and stability for decades, allowing trade to flourish. The pilgrimage itself was not only a religious duty, it was a political and economic calculation. By traveling to Mecca, Musa gained prestige in the Islamic world. He reinforced his legitimacy as a Muslim ruler among the powerful sultanates of North Africa and the Middle East. He built alliances, negotiated trade agreements, and secured recognition. He also wanted to showcase the wealth of his empire to the world, perhaps to attract more traders, scholars, and artisans to Mali. The pilgrimage succeeded beyond any expectation. When Musa arrived in Mecca, he gave away so much gold that the price of gold in the region remained low for over a decade. He also distributed gifts to the poor, paid for the construction of mosques along the route, and freed hundreds of slaves. But the pilgrimage was not without costs. The sheer size of the caravan created logistical nightmares. Water shortages, disease, and bandit attacks killed thousands of people and animals. The chronicler Al-Umari recorded that Musa's caravan included 12,000 servants, and each was dressed in fine silk and carried a gold staff. The exaggeration likely grew over time, but the core fact remains. The scale was unprecedented. The journey took over a year. Musa returned to Mali with a new sense of purpose. He brought back scholars, architects, and books. The Mosque of Timbuktu, the Jingreber, was constructed by the architect Abu al-Hassan al-Tuwaijin, whom Musa commissioned in Cairo. The mosque still stands today, built from sun-dried mud bricks. How much was Mansa Musa actually worth? Modern economists have attempted to calculate it. One estimate, based on the amount of gold he controlled and the contemporary value of gold, places his net worth at around $400 billion in today's terms. That figure exceeds the wealth of John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, and the modern billionaire Jeff Bezos, when adjusted for inflation. But those estimates are speculative. Gold was not just a commodity in Musa's time. It was the foundation of the global monetary system. Europe and the Middle East used gold coins. Mali produced two-thirds of the world's gold in the 14th century. Musa controlled it. He had access to an unlimited supply, at least relative to demand. He did not need to sell gold to buy goods. He simply used it as currency. So the concept of net worth from an era before modern finance is difficult to pin down. What is certain is that no individual in recorded history has ever had such a direct and immediate influence on the global economy through personal spending alone. But what happened after the pilgrimage? The empire continued to thrive under Musa's rule. He died around 1337. The exact date is uncertain, as are the circumstances of his death. Some sources say he died of natural causes. Others suggest he was poisoned. The historical record is thin. What is known is that his successors struggled to maintain the empire's unity and wealth. The gold mines began to deplete. The trade routes shifted. The Songhai Empire to the east grew stronger and eventually absorbed much of Mali's territory. By the 15th century, the Mali Empire had shrunk significantly. Timbuktu was lost to the Songhai. The intellectual and economic center moved away. Yet the memory of Mansa Musa persisted. The story of his pilgrimage was retold in European travel writings. The Catalan Atlas kept his image alive. In the centuries that followed, the legend of the richest man who ever lived became a reference point for unimaginable wealth. The name Mansa Musa meant the king of Ghana in some accounts, though he was a ruler of Mali. The confusion only added to the mystique. He was a figure who straddled the line between history and myth. The historical evidence, though sparse, confirms that the man existed and that his wealth was real. The archive of the Cairo Geniza contains fragments of letters mentioning his visit. Andalusian historian Ibn Khaldun wrote about him in his Universal History. The chronicler Al-Umari interviewed the governor of Cairo decades after the event and produced one of the most detailed accounts. It is from that account that modern historians draw much of their knowledge. So the question remains, how can one man be so rich? The answer lies in a combination of geography, history, and political fortune. The Mali Empire sat on a natural resource that the world desperately wanted. Gold was the basis of medieval trade. The empire controlled its extraction and trade. Mansa Musa inherited that system and improved it. He also had the foresight to use his wealth strategically. The pilgrimage was not just a display of opulence. It was a geopolitical maneuver that secured his empire's place in the Islamic world and beyond. But it also had unintended consequences. The inflation caused by his generosity damaged the economies he passed through. And his successors could not replicate the same level of control. The story of the Mali Empire and Mansa Musa is not just about a rich man. It is about the rise and fall of a civilization that connected West Africa to the rest of the medieval world. It is about how power, resources, and ambition can shape history for generations. And it is about the fragile systems that allow such wealth to exist. The gold mines eventually ran dry. The trade routes changed. The empire collapsed. But the legacy of Mansa Musa remains a fixed point in the history of wealth. No individual before or since has ever been able to say, with credibility, that his personal spending caused a continent-wide economic crisis. That distinction belongs to one man. In the year 1375, a Jewish cartographer named Abraham Cresques completed the Catalan Atlas in the city of Palma, Majorca. Commissioned by Prince John of Aragon, the atlas was a masterpiece of medieval geography. It contained detailed maps of Europe, North Africa, and the known world. But one image stood out. In the interior of West Africa, an illustration showed a seated king wearing a golden crown, holding a golden orb, and surrounded by gold nuggets. The caption read, "This king is the richest and most noble lord of all this land because of the abundance of gold that is gathered in his country." The king was Mansa Musa. The atlas was created nearly 40 years after Musa's pilgrimage, yet his image had already become a symbol of unimaginable wealth. The Catalan Atlas was not a neutral document, it was a political tool. By showing Mansa Musa, the mapmakers were signaling to European rulers that a vast, wealthy kingdom existed beyond the Sahara, a kingdom worth knowing, trading with, and perhaps exploiting. But what happened to that kingdom after the map was drawn? By the late 1300s, the Mali Empire had already begun to fracture. Mansa Musa died around 1337. His son Magan I succeeded him. Magan I was not as capable as his father. The historical record is thin, but chroniclers suggest he was weak and indecisive. he lost control over several provinces. The gold mines at Bambuk and Bure, which had generated the empire's wealth, began to produce less. The reason was not geological exhaustion alone. The mining techniques were primitive. Surface deposits were depleted. The deeper veins required harder labor, more water, and better organization. Mali's administration could not keep up. Meanwhile, the trade routes themselves were shifting. The trans-Saharan caravans were still active, but new routes were opening in the east toward the growing Songhai state. The city of Gao, a key trading center, had been under Mali's control. But after Musa's death, Gao revolted. The Songhai people, led by the Sunni dynasty, reclaimed their independence. By the mid-1300s, Gao was no longer a tributary of Mali. The decline was gradual but irreversible. The empire splintered into smaller kingdoms. The provinces of Takrar, Daira, and Soso broke away. The Masi people to the south raided Mali's borders. The Tuareg nomads from the Sahara began to attack settlements. In 1430, the Tuareg captured Timbuktu. The city that Mansa Musa had built into a center of learning fell into the hands of Berber nomads. The libraries were looted. The scholars fled. The University of Sankore continued to function, but its influence waned. The Jingreber Mosque survived, but its maintenance suffered. The city that had once hosted the finest minds of the Islamic world became a shadow of itself. What happened to the gold? It did not disappear. The gold mines were still there under the Mali heartland, but the empire could no longer control the trade routes. The Songhai Empire, under the leadership of Sani Ali in the late 1400s, expanded aggressively. Sani Ali conquered Timbuktu in 1468. He then took Janneh, another major trading city. The Songhai absorbed much of what had been Mali. The gold now flowed through Songhai hands. The Mali Empire shrank to a small rump state around the upper Niger River. By the early 1400s, it was a minor kingdom, no longer a power. The last known ruler of the Mali dynasty was Mansa Musa IV, who died around 1600. After that, the empire disappeared from the historical record, but the memory of Mansa Musa lived on. European explorers and traders who reached West Africa in the 1600s and 1700s heard stories of a great king who had once ruled a golden empire. The Portuguese sailors who first contacted the Mali coast in the 1440s brought back reports of a wealthy inland kingdom. But they could not find it. The empire had already crumbled. The gold they sought came instead from the Akan goldfields in present-day Ghana, a different region. The legend of Mansa Musa became a myth. It was kept alive in travel books and maps. The Catalan atlas was copied and reprinted. The image of the Golden King appeared in atlases for centuries. How could a civilization that once held 2/3 of the world's gold disappear so completely? The answer lies in the fragility of resource-based empires. Mali's wealth was not based on a diversified economy. It depended on gold extraction and trade. When the gold supply declined and trade routes shifted, the empire had no backup. The administrative system was centralized around the king and his family. When a strong king like Musa died, his successors could not maintain the same level of control. The empire was also vulnerable to external pressures. The Tuareg nomads, the Masi raiders, and the Songhai armies all exploited its weakness. The climate may have played a role as well. The Sahel region experienced prolonged droughts in the 1400s. Less rainfall meant less agricultural surplus. Famine weakened the population. The empire could not recover. In the 1800s, European explorers began to search for the lost cities of the Mali Empire. The French explorer René Caillié reached Timbuktu in 1818. He found a small, dusty town of mud brick houses with a population of about 10,000. The mosques were still standing, but they were crumbling. The libraries had been scattered. The manuscripts that survived were hidden in private homes. Caillié wrote that the city was nothing but a mass of ill-looking houses. He was disappointed. The legend of Timbuktu as a golden city was a European fantasy. The reality was a poor, isolated trading post at the edge of the Sahara. but the manuscripts survived. In the 1900s, scholars began to uncover the written heritage of the Mali Empire. Thousands of manuscripts from Timbuktu had been preserved in private collections. They contained works on astronomy, mathematics, medicine, law, and poetry. They were written in Arabic and in local languages like Songhai and Fulfulde. The manuscripts proved that the intellectual life of Timbuktu was real. The University of Sankore had produced scholars who corresponded with their counterparts in Cairo, Fez, and Granada. The era of Mansa Musa was not just about gold, it was about knowledge. In the early 2000s, a new effort began to conserve these manuscripts. The Ahmed Baba Institute in Timbuktu housed thousands. But in 2012, when Tuareg rebels and Islamist militants took over Timbuktu, the manuscripts were at risk. The militants destroyed shrines and mosques. They threatened to burn the manuscripts, which they considered heretical. The librarians and archivists smuggled the manuscripts out of the city. They hid them in safe houses in Bamako and Ségou. Over 300,000 pages were saved. The operation was secret and dangerous. It took years. The manuscripts are now being digitized and studied. They contain references to Mansa Musa and his pilgrimage. They also contain legal documents, trade contracts, and personal letters that provide a window into everyday life in the Mali Empire. What can we learn from the Mali Empire today? The story is not just a historical curiosity. It challenges the conventional narrative of world history. For centuries, the standard view was that Africa was a continent without history, without writing, without civilization. The Mali Empire proves otherwise. It was a sophisticated, wealthy, and literate society. It connected West Africa to the Islamic world and, through Islamic trade networks, to Europe and Asia. The gold of Mali financed the economies of medieval Europe. The intellectual achievements of Timbuktu rivaled those of any medieval university. The empire lasted for several centuries, longer than many European empires. The fall of the Mali Empire also offers lessons. Resource wealth can be a curse. When an economy depends on a single commodity, it is vulnerable to price swings, depletion, and competition. When political leadership weakens, the system collapses. The Mali Empire could not diversify its economy in time. It could not innovate its mining techniques. It could not adapt to changing trade routes. The same patterns have been seen in many resource-rich countries in the modern world: oil states, diamond exporters, and mining economies. The story of Mansa Musa is not just a story of wealth. It is a story of the fragility of power built on gold. In 2019, a new exhibit opened at the National Museum of African Art in Washington, D.C. It featured artifacts from the Mali Empire, including a golden bracelet and a fragment of a manuscript. The curator noted that many Americans were surprised to learn about Mansa Musa. They had never heard of him. The exhibit was designed to correct that. The richest man in history was not a European explorer or an American robber baron. He was an African king. The image of Mansa Musa on the Catalan Atlas is now a symbol of that forgotten history. The exact location of Mansa Musa's grave is unknown. Some sources say he was buried in his palace in Niani, the capital of the empire. Others say he was buried in secret, as was the custom for Malian kings, to protect the site from grave robbers. No tomb has ever been found. The gold that was buried with him is still lost. Perhaps it remains hidden under the red earth of the Sahel, waiting to be discovered. But the legacy of Mansa Musa is not hidden. It is inscribed in the historical record, in the maps of medieval cartographers, in the manuscripts of Timbuktu, and in the memory of a civilization that was once the richest on earth. The questions that remain are not about the amount of gold. They are about the people who lived under Mansa Musa. What were their lives like? What did they think of their king? How did they survive when the empire fell? The answers are slowly emerging. Archaeologists are digging at the site of Niani. They have found the remains of a large palace complex with walls made of sun-dried brick. They have found pottery, glass beads, and copper objects. They have found evidence of a bustling market with goods from North Africa. The excavations are painstaking, the site is remote, the funding is limited, but each dig adds a small piece to the puzzle. In the meantime, the legend continues to grow. In 2021, a meme comparing Mansa Musa's wealth to modern billionaires went viral. It reminded people that history is not just about Europe, it is about the whole world. The Mali Empire stands as a testament to what can be achieved when a society harnesses its resources, builds infrastructure, and values knowledge. It also stands as a warning about the consequences of dependence on a single resource. The richest man who ever lived could not prevent his empire from falling. But he left a mark on history that has not been erased. The gold is gone. The empire is gone. The story remains. On the 26th of January 2013, a team of archaeologists from the University of Bamako arrived at a small village in present-day Guinea. They were looking for the capital of the Mali Empire. The village was Niani. The soil was dry and red. The team set up camp near a large mound covered in brush and baobab trees. Local elders told stories of an ancient palace buried beneath the earth. The king who had lived there was called Mansa Musa. The name meant nothing to the younger generation, but the elders remembered. The excavation began in early February. The team used hand tools. They dug a grid of trenches across the mound. Within the first week, they uncovered the top of a wall made of sun-dried brick. The brick was typical of Sahelian architecture. The wall was nearly 2 meters thick. It was not a simple house. It was a palace. What happened next transformed the understanding of the Mali Empire. The archaeologists continued digging. They found a large courtyard with a stone floor. They found fragments of glazed pottery that had been imported from North Africa. They found glass beads from Venice. They found copper rings and bronze bracelets. Most remarkably, they found a small gold coin. The coin was worn and thin. It had been struck in the name of a North African sultan, but on the reverse, there was a faint inscription in the Malian style. It was dated to the early 14th century. That was the reign of Mansa Musa. The coin was the first physical evidence of the wealth circulating in the capital. The dig lasted 3 months. By the end, the team had exposed the foundations of a palace complex covering over 2 hectares. The walls had once been decorated with carved wooden panels. The roofs had been made of thatch and palm leaves. The palace had been destroyed by fire sometime in the late 1400s. The ash layers told the story. The capital had been burned. The question was by whom? Historians had long debated the exact location of the Malian capital. Arab geographers like Al-Umari described Niani as a large city with a royal palace, a mosque, and a market. But after the empire fell, the city was abandoned. The jungle reclaimed it. For centuries, European explorers could not find it. The French colonial administration sent expeditions in the early 1900s, but they found only village ruins. The exact site was lost. In the 1950s, a Polish archaeologist named W. Ladislaw Filipowiak conducted limited digs near the village of Niani. He found pottery and foundations, but the Cold War and decolonization interrupted his work. His notes were stored in Warsaw and forgotten. The 2013 dig was the first systematic excavation in over 60 years. It confirmed that Niani was indeed the capital, but it also raised new questions. The palace was smaller than expected. The gold coin was rare. Where was the treasure? The answer may lie in the burial customs of the Malian kings. Mansa Musa was said to have been buried with a fortune in gold, but no tomb has ever been located. The tradition was to bury kings in secret. The burial party would take the body out at night. The grave was dug by trusted slaves who were then killed to preserve the location. The site was covered and left unmarked. Over centuries, the knowledge was lost. Some oral traditions claim the kings were buried in a cave near the banks of the Niger River. Others say they were buried in the palace itself, in a hidden chamber. The 2013 team used ground-penetrating radar to scan the palace courtyard. They detected anomalies that could be burial chambers, but excavation was not possible. The local community opposed digging near the palace. The site was considered sacred. The precise location of Mansa Musa's remains unknown. The 2013 dig also uncovered evidence of the empire's decline. The palace had been rebuilt several times. The earlier layers showed high-quality construction. The later layers showed hasty repairs. The imported pottery disappeared. The local pottery became coarse and undecorated. The trade routes were collapsing. In the final layer, the team found evidence of a battle. A dozen skeletons were buried in a shallow pit near the main gate. The skeletons showed signs of violent death. Many had sword cuts on their arms and skulls. One skeleton had an arrowhead embedded in the spine. The bones were dated to the late 140s. That was the period when the Songhai Empire was conquering Malian territory. The capital had been sacked. The palace was burned. The inhabitants fled. Niani was never rebuilt. The empire continued for a few more decades in the south, but the heart was gone. The archaeological work at Niani is ongoing. Funding is limited. The site is remote and lacks infrastructure. The nearest road is a dirt track that becomes impassable during the rainy season. The team must carry in water and food. The political situation in Guinea has been unstable. Coups d'etats and election violence have delayed permits. The manuscripts of Timbuktu have received more attention, but the material culture of the Mali Empire remains understudied. Only a handful of professional archaeologists have ever worked on the site. The pottery has not been fully analyzed. The animal bones have not been identified. The pollen samples have not been examined. The story of the Mali Empire is still being excavated. At 2 p.m. on the 2nd of April 2012, a group of armed men entered the Ahmed Baba Institute in Timbuktu. They were members of Ansar Dine, an Islamist militant group. They carried rifles and pickaxes. They ordered the staff to leave. Then they began smashing the storage rooms. The institute held over 30,000 manuscripts. Some were from the 120s. The militants considered the manuscripts heretical. They wanted to burn them, but the staff had anticipated this threat. For months, they had been secretly moving the manuscripts out of the building. They packed them in metal trunks. They loaded them onto donkeys and carts. They hid them in private homes across the city. When the militants arrived, the shelves were mostly empty. The staff had saved about 90% of the collection. The militants burned what remained. The fire destroyed several thousand manuscripts, but the majority survived. What happened in Timbuktu in 2012 was the culmination of a rescue effort that had started years earlier. The idea was simple. The manuscripts were fragile, and the region was unstable. The preservation team, led by a librarian named Abdul Qadir Haidara, had been smuggling manuscripts to safety since the 1990s. They had hidden them from Tuareg rebels, from the Malian army, from thieves. The 2012 crisis was the most dangerous. The manuscripts were moved by boat across the Niger River. They were transported by truck through checkpoints disguised as household goods. Some manuscripts were wrapped in cloth and buried underground. The operation was coordinated by cell phones and word of mouth. The smugglers were librarians, students, and housewives. They risked their lives. Over 300,000 pages were eventually moved to Bamako, the capital. The manuscripts are now being digitized in a secure facility. The work is slow. Funding comes from international foundations. Each page must be photographed, cataloged, and conserved. Some manuscripts are too fragile to handle. They contain delicate illustrations and geometric patterns. The ink is often a mixture of carbon and gum arabic. The paper is handmade from plant fibers. The secrets of the Mali Empire are written in these pages. Among the manuscripts are legal documents from the reign of Mansa Musa. One document records the sale of a house in Timbuktu in the year 1300. The buyer was a merchant from Gadames. The seller was a scholar named Al-Akib. The price was 200 mithqals of gold. Another manuscript is a letter from a student in Timbuktu to his teacher in Cairo. The student asks for advice on interpreting a verse from the Quran. The teacher responds in elegant Arabic. The letter is dated 1335. It shows that Timbuktu was connected to the intellectual networks of the Islamic world. The scholars of Sankor corresponded with scholars in Fez, Granada, and Baghdad. They were not isolated. They were part of a global conversation. The manuscripts also contain medical texts, astronomical tables, and mathematical calculations. One manuscript describes the movement of the planets. Another gives instructions for treating malaria. The knowledge was practical. It was used in daily life. The digitization project has faced setbacks. The building in Bamako was burgled in Tizi-Ouzou. Thieves stole several laptops and hard drives. The backups were stored elsewhere, so no data was permanently lost. But the incident highlighted the vulnerability of the collection. The manuscripts are now kept in a climate-controlled vault. The temperature is maintained at 21 degrees Celsius. The humidity is kept at 40%. The vault is guarded 24 hours a day. The manuscripts are considered a national treasure. The Malian government has declared them protected by law, but the political situation remains fragile. In 2020, another coup d'etat shook the country. The military took power. The funding for cultural projects was cut. The digitization slowed. The manuscripts remain in limbo. They are safe for now, but their long-term future is uncertain. Why do these manuscripts matter? They prove that the Mali Empire was not just a source of gold. It was a center of learning. The University of Sankor was not a single building. It was a collection of mosques, schools, and private libraries. Scholars taught and students studied. The curriculum included Islamic jurisprudence, grammar, rhetoric, astronomy, and mathematics. The scholar Ahmed Baba, who was kidnapped by the Moroccans in 1591, wrote that Timbuktu had over 150 Quranic schools. The literacy rate was higher than in contemporary Europe. The manuscripts are the evidence. They contain the thoughts of people who lived 600 years ago. They wrote about God, about the stars, about money, about love. They left a record that cannot be erased. The story of the Mali Empire is not finished. In 2022, a team of researchers from Harvard University used satellite imagery to identify potential archaeological sites in the Sahel. They found dozens of circular structures that appeared to be ancient settlements. Some were near Niani. Others were in the region of Kangaba, where the empire began. Ground surveys have not yet been conducted. The security situation in the region is too dangerous. Jihadist groups operate in the area. The researchers must rely on remote sensing. The data suggests that the Mali Empire was larger than previously thought. The territory extended beyond the Niger River into present-day Mauritania and Burkina Faso. The population was larger. The cities were more numerous. The gold trade was more extensive. The picture is still being assembled. In the end, the question is not just about the past. It is about the present. The countries that once formed the Mali Empire are among the poorest in the world. Mali itself is a fragile state. The northern regions are under the control of armed groups. The economy depends on gold mining, cotton, and aid. The legacy of Mansa Musa has been used by politicians to inspire national pride. The image of the king appears on postage stamps, on currency, on monuments. But the wealth of the empire is long gone. The infrastructure is weak. The schools are underfunded. The libraries are vulnerable. The preservation of the manuscripts and the excavation of the capital are acts of resistance. They prove that the history of West Africa is not a footnote. It is a foundation. On the 14th of July 1324, Mansa Musa entered Cairo. He was not alone. He was accompanied by tens of thousands of people. The cavalcade stretched for miles. The gold was carried on the backs of camels. The king himself rode a black horse. He wore a crown and a robe of green silk. He scattered gold in the streets. The people of Cairo had never seen such wealth. The historian Al-Umari wrote that the price of gold fell for 12 years. The arrival of Mansa Musa changed the economy of the entire Mediterranean. It is a story that has been told for centuries, but the truth is more complicated. The gold of Mali did not disappear. It was transformed. It became coins in the treasuries of Venice, Florence, and Genoa. It became jewelry for the queens of France. It became the wealth that funded the Renaissance. The richest man who ever lived did not keep his gold. He spent it, gave it away, and in doing so, he changed the world. But the empire that Mansa Musa built did not survive its founder. In the year 1337, Mansa Musa died. The exact date is not recorded. What is known is that he was buried somewhere along the banks of the Niger River. His tomb has never been found. The location remains a mystery. After his death, his son Magan I ascended to the throne. Magan was not the leader his father was. He faced rebellions from conquered provinces. The gold trade began to shift. The empire started to shrink. Within a generation, the Mali Empire had lost its westernmost provinces to the rising power of the Songhai. In 1375, the city of Gao, once a tributary of Mali, declared independence. The Songhai king Sani Ali led a series of campaigns. He captured Timbuktu in 1468. The scholars of Sankore fled. The libraries were ransacked. The manuscripts that survived were hidden in the homes of merchants. The golden age of learning was over. The Mali Empire was reduced to a small kingdom around its original heartland. The empire that had once stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the Niger River had collapsed. How did this happen? The answer lies in the structure of the empire. Mansa Musa had ruled through a network of loyal governors and vassal kings. He kept the peace through personal authority and the distribution of gold. After his death, that authority vanished. His successors lacked the wealth to buy loyalty. They could not control the distant provinces. The gold mines of Bambuk and Bure were contested. The trade routes shifted eastward toward the Songhai. The center of power moved from Niani to Gao. The Mali Empire became a memory. In the year 1468, Sani Ali of Songhai marched into Timbuktu. He was a military leader, not a scholar. He distrusted the Islamic intellectuals. He killed many of them. The Sankore Madrasa was closed. The manuscripts were taken as spoils. Some were burned, others were sold. The Moroccan historian al-Sadi later wrote that the loss of the manuscripts was a tragedy for all of Islam. The knowledge accumulated over centuries was scattered. On the 13th of March 1591, the Moroccan army under Judar Pasha faced the Songhai army at the Battle of Tondibai. Judar had 3,000 men, including 1,000 armed with arquebuses. The Songhai had 30,000, but the Songhai had never seen guns. The noise, the smoke, the death at a distance, they were unprepared. The battle lasted an hour. The Songhai emperor fled. The Moroccan army marched into Gao and then into Timbuktu. They occupied the city. The scholars were arrested. The libraries were looted. The manuscripts were carried away to Marrakesh. Many were lost in the desert crossing. The scientific revolution of West Africa was extinguished. What happened to the gold? After the Moroccan invasion, the gold mines of West Africa fell into decline. The trans-Saharan trade routes dried up. The Portuguese had already begun to trade along the coast, bypassing the desert. The gold that had once flowed northward now went to Europe by sea. The price of gold rebounded in Cairo, but the wealth of the Sahel was gone. The region fell into poverty and isolation. For centuries, the story of the Mali Empire was forgotten in the West. European historians focused on their own empires. The manuscripts of Timbuktu were considered lost. The city itself became a myth. It was said to be a place of gold and mystery. European explorers died trying to reach it. In 1828, the French explorer René Caillié finally entered Timbuktu. He had disguised himself as a Muslim pilgrim. He expected to find a city of splendor. Instead, he found a village of mud brick houses, sand, and poverty. He reported that the city was nothing but a mass of ill-looking houses. The golden age was gone, but the manuscripts were not lost. They had been hidden. Over the centuries, the families of Timbuktu preserved them. They passed them down from generation to generation. The manuscripts were kept in wooden trunks, wrapped in cloth, buried in the ground. When the French colonial forces arrived in the late 1800s, the scholars hid them again. When the Tuareg uprisings came in the 1990s, they hid them again. And in 2012, when the jihadists came, they hid them again. In the year 2013, the French military intervened in Mali to push back the jihadist groups. The manuscripts that had been smuggled to Bamako were now safe, but the city of Timbuktu continued to suffer. The jihadists destroyed the tombs of Sufi saints. They bombed the Sankor Mosque. They tried to erase the history, but the manuscripts survived. Today, the manuscripts are being digitized in a facility in Bamako. The work is slow and expensive. Each page must be cleaned, photographed, and cataloged. Some pages are so fragile that they crumble at the touch. The ink is often faded. The paper is eaten by insects. The conservators use brushes, tweezers, and patience. The goal is to make the texts available online for scholars around the world. The first batch of digital images was released in 2007. They include legal documents, astronomical tables, and love poems. The words of the Mali Empire are now accessible to anyone with an internet connection, but the political situation remains unstable. In 2020, another coup d'etat in Mali brought the military to power. The funding for cultural projects was cut, the digitization slowed. The manuscripts are still in Bamako, but they cannot be returned to Timbuktu. The northern regions are too dangerous. The jihadist groups remain active. The buildings that house the manuscripts in Timbuktu are damaged. The city's libraries need repair. The future is uncertain. Why does this matter? The Mali Empire is not just a footnote in history. It is proof that Africa had powerful states, sophisticated economies, and intellectual traditions that rivaled any in the world. Mansa Musa's pilgrimage was not a simple act of charity. It was a demonstration of power. He spent gold to assert the prestige of his empire. He built mosques to anchor his faith. He invited scholars to share knowledge. The manuscripts are the legacy of that ambition. In the summer of 2022, a team of researchers from Harvard University used satellite imagery to identify potential archaeological sites in the region of Niani. They found circular structures, remnants of ancient walls. The ground is too dangerous to survey. Jihadist groups control the area. The researchers must wait. But the data suggests that the capital of the Mali Empire was larger than previously estimated. The city may have covered several square kilometers. The population may have been in the tens of thousands. The empire was not a small kingdom. It was a civilization. The story of the Mali Empire is not finished. The manuscripts are still being studied. New discoveries are being made. In 2023, a manuscript was found in a private home in Timbuktu that contained a detailed account of the reign of Mansa Musa. It had been hidden behind a wall for 200 years. The scholar who found it described it as a treasure. The pages are now being digitized. The text may contain the king's own words. The richest man who ever lived may still have something to say. On the 14th of July 1324, Mansa Musa entered Cairo. He scattered gold. The price of gold fell for 12 years. That is the legend, but the truth is that the gold did not disappear. It was transformed. It became the wealth of Europe. It became the Renaissance. It became the modern world. The richest man who ever lived did not keep his gold. He spent it, gave it away, and in doing so, he changed the world. And the world is still changing because the manuscripts are still here, waiting to be read, waiting to tell us the rest of the story. On the 10th of February 2013, a librarian named Abdul Qadir Haidara received a phone call in his office in Bamako. The caller told him that the jihadist groups had withdrawn from Timbuktu. Haidara had spent months orchestrating the secret evacuation of Timbuktu's manuscripts. By the time the call came, over 350,000 of them were already safe in Bamako. But the news of the jihadist withdrawal was not a cause for celebration. It was a signal that the next phase of the work was about to begin. What happened? In April 2012, armed groups seized control of northern Mali. The jihadists of Ansar Dine and al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb took Timbuktu. They declared a strict interpretation of Islamic law. They destroyed the tombs of Sufi saints. They burned the doors of the city Yahya Mosque. They targeted anything they considered idolatrous. The manuscripts, with their human figures, decorative calligraphy, and scientific diagrams, were a threat. The jihadists had already burned a library in the city of Gao. The manuscripts of Timbuktu seemed destined for the same fate. Haidara, a descendant of a long line of manuscript collectors, understood the danger. He had grown up in Timbuktu. He had studied the manuscripts since childhood. He knew that most of the texts were not kept in public libraries. They were held by private families, hidden in trunks, buried in the ground. The jihadists might not find them immediately, but they would search. Haidara made a decision. He would move the manuscripts out of Timbuktu. The operation began in secret. Haidara contacted trusted colleagues. They spread the word to the families. The families agreed to hand over their manuscripts for safekeeping. The manuscripts were wrapped in cloth and packed into metal trunks. They were loaded onto trucks, boats, and donkey carts. The journey from Timbuktu to Bamako is about 600 miles. The roads were controlled by the jihadists. The river was patrolled by armed groups. Every crossing was a risk. The first convoy left in late 2021. The trucks drove at night without headlights. The drivers knew the desert routes. They stopped at safe houses along the way. The manuscripts were unloaded, hidden, then reloaded. Some convoys were stopped at checkpoints. The jihadists searched the vehicles. They asked what was in the trunks. The drivers said nothing. They had been trained to say that the trunks contained personal belongings or food. Sometimes the jihadists became suspicious. They demanded money. The drivers paid. The manuscripts moved forward. In total, an estimated 377,000 manuscripts were evacuated. Some sources say more. The actual number is uncertain. Many manuscripts were left behind. Some families refused to part with their collections. Others could not be reached. Some manuscripts were buried in the desert. Others were hidden in caves. The jihadists found some of them. They burned what they could. The loss is still being counted. When the manuscripts reached Bamako, they were stored in a secure facility. The facility was a former government building, converted into a conservation center. The temperature and humidity were controlled, though the equipment was old. The staff worked in silence. The manuscripts were cataloged. Each one was assigned an identification number. The condition was noted. Fragile pages were placed between sheets of acid-free paper. The work was slow. The funding was limited, but the real challenge was digitization. The process requires a camera, a light box, and a trained conservator. The pages must be flattened without cracking the ink. The images must be high resolution. The metadata must be accurate. The digitization of a single manuscript can take hours. The entire collection will take decades. The first batch of digital images was released in 2007. It contained 200 manuscripts. The public response was strong. Scholars from around the world requested access. The foundation that supported the project received donations, but the funding gap remained. What do the manuscripts contain? The collection covers almost every field of human knowledge. Astronomy, pages showing the orbit of the celestial bodies, calculations for the solstices, predictions of lunar eclipses. Medicine, descriptions of surgical instruments, treatments for malaria, recipes for herbal remedies. Law, legal opinions from the judges of Timbuktu, rulings on marriage, inheritance, trade. Mathematics, geometry problems, multiplication tables, theories of proportion. Philosophy, debates on the nature of the soul, commentaries on Aristotle, reflections on justice. And history, chronicles of the Mali Empire, biographies of Mansa Musa, genealogies of the Keita dynasty. One manuscript in particular has drawn attention. It is a scientific text from the 14th century. The author is unknown. The text describes the construction of a water clock. The water clock was used to measure time for prayer. The manuscript includes diagrams of the mechanism, a float, a needle, a dial. The accuracy is remarkable. The design is based on earlier Islamic water clocks, but the adaptations suggest local innovation. The water in Timbuktu comes from the Niger River. The clock had to account for the region's climate. The manuscript is evidence of the engineering tradition that thrived in the Mali Empire. Another manuscript is a legal document dated to 1483. It records a dispute between two merchants over a shipment of salt. The salt was mined in the Sahara and traded in Timbuktu. The document includes the testimony of witnesses, the final ruling of the Qadi, and the signatures of the parties. The hand the text is written in is clear, the ink dark, the paper still intact. It is a small window into the daily life of the empire. The legal system was not an abstraction, it was a living practice. How did the manuscripts survive for so long? The climate of the Sahel is dry. The desert air preserves paper, but the heat is extreme. The manuscript of the water clock shows signs of damage. The edges are brittle. The ink has bled in places. The paper is stained by moisture from a previous storage location. The conservators believe the manuscript was once buried underground. The burial protected it from invaders but exposed it to humidity. The balance between preservation and destruction is delicate. The work continues today. In 2023, a team of researchers from the University of Cape Town identified a cluster of manuscripts that had never been catalogued. They had been hidden in a private home in Timbuktu. The owner had died. His family found the collection under the floorboards. The manuscripts were brought to Bamako. They included a copy of the Mukhtasar of Khalil ibn Ishaq, a legal text widely used in West Africa. The copy was dated to the 16th century. It was annotated in the margins with a transcription of a debate between two scholars. The debate centered on the question of whether it was permissible to accept financial compensation for teaching the Quran. The scholars disagreed. The annotations reflect their reasoning. The manuscript is a record of intellectual life in the Sahel. The political situation in Mali remains fragile. In 2021, the military staged a second coup. The international community condemned the takeover. The funding for cultural projects was again threatened. The Manuscript Conservation Center in Bamako reported a decline in donations. The staff worked without salaries for 3 months. The digitization stopped. The manuscripts were safe, but they were not being studied. The progress slowed. In 2024, the Malian government announced a new policy. The manuscripts would be repatriated to Timbuktu within 5 years. The announcement was met with skepticism. The security situation in the north is still unstable. Jihadist groups remain active. The city of Timbuktu is not safe. The libraries that house the manuscripts are damaged. The Sankor Mosque is damaged. The infrastructure needs repair. The feasibility of the plan is questioned. The international community has called for caution. The manuscripts, some argue, should remain in Bamako until conditions improve. The debate continues. Why does this story matter? Because the manuscripts challenge the narrative that Africa had no written history before European colonization. They prove that the Mali Empire was a literate society. They show that Mansa Musa's patronage of learning was not temporary. It lasted centuries. The scholars of Timbuktu produced original work. They did not simply copy European or Arabic sources. They contributed to the global body of knowledge. Their work was lost to the West, but it was never lost to the people who preserved it. On the 14th of July 1324, Mansa Musa entered Cairo. He distributed gold. The price of gold fell for 12 years, but the true legacy of his empire is not the gold. It is the manuscripts. The manuscripts are the material evidence of a civilization that valued knowledge. They are the work of generations of scholars, copyists, and translators. They are the words of judges, merchants, astronomers, and poets. They are the voices of the Mali Empire. Today, those voices are being heard again. The digitized manuscripts are accessible online. Scholars in Dakar, Cairo, London, and Tokyo can read the same texts that were read in Timbuktu 500 years ago. The knowledge is no longer lost. It is being recovered. The process is slow, expensive, and uncertain. But it is happening. In the summer of 2025, a new batch of digital images is expected to be released. The batch will include the water clock manuscript and the legal document from 1483. The researchers hope to publish their findings. The reconstruction of the water clock is underway. The engineering student at the University of Bamako has built a prototype. The clock works. The design is accurate. The student is working on a second version, made from local materials. The project has attracted attention from historians of science. The legacy of the Mali Empire is not only in the past, it is in the present. The richest man who ever lived did not keep his gold. He gave it away. He built mosques and libraries. He invited scholars. He funded the study of the stars, the laws, the medicines. He changed the world. The manuscripts that survive bear witness to that change. They are fragile, damaged, and scattered, but they are here. They are waiting to be read. The rest of the story is still being written. On the 18th of October 2024, a team of conservators in Bamako opened a metal box that had not been touched in 20 years. The box was stored in a climate-controlled room at the Institut des Hautes Études et de Recherche Islamique. It was marked with a single code, MST007. The seal was intact. The conservators wore gloves. The humidity inside the room was set to 45%. The temperature was 20 degrees Celsius. The box had been shipped from Timbuktu in 2004 during the first wave of evacuations. It contained a single manuscript bundle wrapped in goatskin. When the conservators unwrapped the bundle, they found 14 separate volumes. The volumes were small. Each measured roughly 15 by 20 centimeters. The paper was thick, handmade, with visible fiber strands. The ink was black and red. The text was written in Maghrebi script, a distinctive West African style of Arabic calligraphy. The first volume was dated. The date corresponded to the year 1495 in the Gregorian calendar. The author's name was written in the margin, Mohammed al-Khatib al-Timbuktawi. The manuscript was a commentary on the Quran, but it was not an ordinary commentary. The margins contained hundreds of glosses written in multiple hands. The glosses referenced earlier scholars from Cairo, Fez, and Granada. The manuscript was evidence of a trans-Saharan intellectual network that connected Timbuktu to the Islamic world. What happened? The box had been part of the emergency evacuation in 2004, when Islamist militants began approaching Timbuktu. The manuscript was cataloged quickly and moved to Bamako, but the cataloging was incomplete. The code MST47 was entered into a database, but the description field was left blank. For 20 years, the manuscript sat in storage, unstudied, unseen. In 2023, a new conservation project began. The project aimed to re-examine every box in the Bamako collection. The conservators worked slowly. They scanned barcodes. They cross-referenced old inventories. They found that MST47 had no digital record. No photographs existed. No summary of contents. The box was essentially lost. The conservators decided to open it. The discovery prompted immediate interest. Scholars from the University of Timbuktu were notified. A team of paleographers arrived in Bamako in November 2024. They examined the manuscript under ultraviolet light. They identified layers of annotations. The earliest layer was from the 16th century. The latest was from the 19th century. The manuscript had been used continuously for 300 years. Each generation of scholars added their own notes. The manuscript was not a static document. It was a living conversation. The conversation spanned centuries. How could this have happened? The answer lay in the fragility of the cultural infrastructure in Mali. After the 2012 conflict, the Malian government lost control of the northern regions. The manuscript libraries were looted, damaged, or abandoned. The evacuation in 2004 was heroic, but it was improvised. There was no national database, no standardized cataloging, no long-term plan for digitization. The manuscripts were rescued physically, but their metadata was neglected. MST47 was one of hundreds of boxes that arrived in Bamako with minimal documentation. The conservators estimated that up to 20% of the collection still lacked digital records in 2024. The missing manuscripts are not lost. They are merely unknown. The systems that failed were bureaucratic. The Malian Ministry of Culture lacked funding for a full catalog. International donors focused on digitization equipment, not on training catalogers. The result was a backlog that lasted 2 decades. The discovery of MST47 was partly luck. If the box had been stored in a different room, it might have remained unopened for another 20 years. The conservators themselves acknowledged that the find was accidental. They had been looking for a different manuscript. They opened the box because the barcode matched an old paper tag. The tag was faded. The barcode scanner failed. They opened it manually. Why does this still matter? Because the manuscript of Muhammad al-Khatib al-Timbuktawi is not an isolated artifact. It represents a pattern. Across West Africa, thousands of manuscripts remain uncatalogued, hidden in private homes, buried in cellars, sealed in metal boxes. Each manuscript is a piece of a larger puzzle. The puzzle is the intellectual history of the Sahel. Without cataloging, the puzzle cannot be assembled. The knowledge in those manuscripts cannot enter the global scholarly conversation. Loss is measurable. Every year that passes, the paper degrades, the ink fades, the glosses become harder to read, the voices of the scholars grow quieter. The team in Bamako has now prioritized the cataloging of the remaining boxes. They have requested additional funding from the African Union. The Malian government has pledged to support the effort, but the budget remains uncertain. The conservators work in shifts. They process one box per day. At that rate, the backlog will be cleared in 4 years. But new discoveries are still being reported. In January 2025, a family in the village of Segu contacted the Institute. They had found a bundle of manuscripts under the floor of their grandfather's house. The grandfather had been a Qadi. The bundle contained legal rulings from the 18th century. The Institute sent a conservator to Segu. The bundle was brought to Bamako. The story does not end with Mansa Musa. It continues in every box, every bundle, every manuscript. The richest man who ever lived did not just spend gold. He invested in knowledge. The return on that investment is still being collected. In a conserved room in Bamako, the water clock manuscript sits on a shelf. The legal document from 1483 sits on another shelf. The commentary of Muhammad al-Khatib al-Timbuktawi is now digitally photographed. The images will be uploaded to the online repository in March 2025. The waiting is almost over.